For our back wall, we have some pieces listed under medium weight chipboard. It's the one that says back wall. There's the top and bottom and the ends and supports. We need those pieces. And then on the lightweight chipboard, the pieces for the back wall are on this last line, and they're 3.5 inch, and it says by 7 5/8, but it also says check length before cutting. So let's see how to check that length. You can see I have my base here, and you recall we made tick marks for our curved walls to go in, and I'm just going to take my back corner wall, and it should fit right in between those two tick marks, but if it doesn't, just get it so that the edge out here is nicely aligned. And then take two of your columns, the columns that we made. They won't go right next to each other in the final project, but this just makes it easier to measure like this. And we'll have them snug right up against each other there. And then measure the length to the end and see if you need to make an adjustment. Now mine is 7 5/8, which is what was on the cutting guide, so I'll cut my back wall pieces to 7 5/8. If yours is a little different, just make that adjustment. You don't have to get too persnickety. You don't want to be over the length, and you can probably make a slight adjustment to move the curved wall that way, but it may not fit as nicely along this edge. If you do, that's just something to be aware of. So now that I've checked my measurement here and I have 7 5/8, I'll go cut my two pieces of lightweight chipboard that go for the back, and for these, make sure the stiffness is running the length of the chipboard. So here are my pieces laid out for my back wall, the front and the back, the top and the bottom, and all the little supports. And the first thing I want to do is on one piece of my back wall to just draw some vertical lines every inch. Now obviously, since this wall is shorter than 8 inches, the last space won't be exactly an inch, but that's okay. We just want to have kind of guidelines to put our supports in. So I'll continue drawing my lines across. Now that I have all my lines drawn, I'm going to take my top and bottom pieces. I'm just running my fingers along them just to make sure they're as straight as can be. We cut them from the stiff length, so they shouldn't want to curve too much, but sometimes they do just because they're so narrow. And I'll run a bead of glue right along on the top of the back wall right next to the edge, and I'll put the top piece on and the bottom piece on. I'll make sure that they're sitting plumb and allow those to set up and dry. Now because the inside of this piece is wide enough, I can use my two inkers that I have out here and just kind of push them together, and that because these edges are perpendicular to my surface, that helps me make sure that I'm getting these walls in nice and straight. So once my top and bottom are in, I can take my support pieces, and two of these are also the end pieces, and they will just go flush along the end, and run glue on my lines and a little bit on the top and the bottom, and put all of those pieces in. Once you have all of your supports in and they have set up enough so they're not going to be moving around, take your other piece of wall and just kind of do a little fit and make sure that nothing is hanging over. If it's a little bit short, that's not a major concern, but just, you know, if there's anything that's hanging over, you can give it a slight trim, and this one looks fine. So then I'm just going to run glue around the edges and on all my supports and get my other piece installed. And once I have the other side on here, I'm just going to put this to the side under a weight so that it can get nice and dry in a flat position. Now that my back wall is thoroughly dry, I'm going to take my marker and go around the edges before I put decorative paper on it. So for the back of my wall that faces in towards the courtyard, I'm just going to cut a 1 1/2 inch strip of pattern paper and then a 2-inch strip of cardstock to fill in below. That way I can conserve the paper that I need for the removable wall here in a few minutes. And then for the outside, I'm going to trim my paper off so that I've got a straight edge going across here. And now I'll be able to cut a piece of that to fit, and I will still have sufficient for my removable wall outside. Again, these pieces are just going edge to edge. No wrapping involved. So once you have the decorative paper on both sides, put it on, I've got it just on some protective paper here, and I've got the top oriented away from me, and now I'm going to put 2 columns, one on either end, and make sure I have this whole unit flat on my table and that the ends are even down here along. And I'll just put some glue on the ends of the wall and hold those columns in place till they set up. Once I made sure everything was together flat and straight, I put some rubber bands around it, and I'll just set that aside to thoroughly dry. Now we can work on the removable wall. That's the wall that will go in front of the opening of our interior box. And for medium weight chipboard, we have a top and bottom piece, some 10 of the little ends and support pieces, and then there's 2 small reinforcement pieces listed on here as well. And then on the lightweight chipboard, there are 2 pieces that are listed here, and they should be stiff on their long edge here. So those are the pieces that we'll need. We'll also need a couple of scraps of chipboard. These should just be taller than the removable wall, so about 4 inches tall. So the first thing we want to do is put the matching magnets on one of our pieces of the removable wall. So you can see I've got my interior support piece out here, and I'm just going to put my little extra pieces of chipboard so they cover up those magnets. And then I have magnets that have self-adhesive. If you don't, you don't have to remove the backing, but I'll just put them down so that if you do have self-adhesive, do it so that the self-adhesive side is sticking up. And I'll put the other one on. Now the magnets will naturally seek out their matching side that's on the box there, so they'll just kind of snap into place. And then when we line up the bottom we want to line up exactly, but over here on the left edge we want to hold the left edge of our removable wall back just about a 1/16 of an inch or so. So when you put that down, hold that edge back. You might not be able to see it there, but I have about a 1/16 of an inch of my box showing. And I'm going to lay this down so that I make sure that this bottom edge is flush with my work surface, and then I'll put some pressure on the magnets so that they'll stick in place. Now if you don't have self-adhesive magnets, just put a tiny drop of glossy accents or diamond glaze on there to hold the magnets in place. And then if you're using glossy accents or diamond glaze, let that set up for a second before you pick this up by using the pieces of chipboard shims that we've got in there. That way the magnets won't shift around and they're in the proper place to attach to our end of our building here. One other thing before you take this off is to make sure you mark for the top inside. So now with the top inside facing me there, I'm going to make some marks for the interior supports. I'm going to start at the left and mark in 3/4 of an inch to begin with. And then after I make that first 3/4, I'll make the rest of these at 1 inch. And you don't need to make one right here at the end. So I've just made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. That's all you need. So we'll start building this wall much like we did the back wall by gluing on our top and bottom strips and making sure they're as straight as possible when we put them on. Now, on the one that's going to go on the top, I'm going to just write the word top so that pretty soon this writing is going to get covered up and I won't know which side of my wall is up. So when you put this together, make sure that you can see the word top right there. So I'll run a bead of glue and I'll put my top and bottom pieces on. And then once my top and bottom have set up for a few minutes, I've run some glue on my ends and I'll put those end pieces in place. Once the ends are in place, we can put our little wall reinforcements in place. And I'll just put some glue on the back. And these are just going to go where the magnets are, just kind of help them give a little more sturdiness to this thin chipboard. So on the left side, we'll skip this narrow space and we'll put this piece in the first full 1 inch space. So just put that in there. And then on the right side, this is going to go right up against the end piece so that those things are right behind where the magnets are. Now we'll just fill in with the remaining of our little support pieces. We'll put them on either side of this reinforcement that's here and on the left side of this one, and then the rest will go on the lines. And then once you have all the support pieces in and they are setting up, have set up, then go ahead and run glue on the tops and put your other piece in place and then put it under some weights to dry. And I should say that you'll want to check the fit and make sure that everything looks good before you glue it on. We can prep our decorative paper while we're waiting for the wall unit to dry, and I've cut a piece of the paper that I'm using for the inside to 10.5 inches long and 4.5 inches tall. 10.5 by 4.5. And you can see I've got it on my scoreboard here because I want to do some scoring. I'm going to score at 1/2 inch, and then 1 inch, and then 9.5, and 10, and then I'll turn it this way and I'll score at 3.5 and 4. I'll use my bone folder to reinforce all of those scores, and then I'll put score tape on just the outermost tabs. So I've put score tape around on my tabs, and now I want to do a little cutting. I'm going to miter on the corners to this little square that's there, and then cut out around that square. So I'll do that and then I'll show you what it looks like. So that's what it looks like after it's been cut, and I'll repeat that on this corner over here. Then we want to make a slit that goes up here, and I just trimmed it off at a slight angle there so that we'll have a little tab right here. And we'll repeat that on this other side, so there's a little tab there. And that's our prep for this paper. And so here is my glued up unit. Here's my word top, and I have the magnet side facing me. And the first thing I want to do is just run score tape along the edges, just on the magnet side. Now let's just do a dry fit of how this is going to go on. Our top side is the edge that is not scored. Those tabs go to the back here, and then these little tabs that we cut like that, we'll glue them to the bottom. And then finally we'll wrap this bottom edge. And that'll give our wall some nice clean finishing. So that's how it's going to go on. Now to prep this, I'll just remove the score tape backing, and then I'll put some rings of glue around my magnets. And just some glue here and there in the in-between part here. And then remember, our top goes with the cut edge of our paper, and just use the folds to help you get it in there nicely. Get that top edge aligned just right. I forgot to say put a little black ink along this top edge. So I just did that in case it wants to show a little bit. And then we can remove our score tape backing from the back here. Put a little glue on the little tabs, and we'll wrap the sides first, and then stick those little tabs underneath. Just going to ink the edges of down here a little bit in case that wants to show, and then finally I'll just wrap that bottom edge tightly. Do some burnishing all around. So that's the inside cover, and then for the outside, keep in mind where your top is. And I've cut a piece that is the same size as my panel here, which was 3.5 by 8.5. And I've inked the edges and prepped that with score tape. And this time I'll remember to go on my top edge with my marker. And now I'll fasten this down. It is directional, so make sure you've got your top there. And I'll add a little extra glue in the middle. And then I'll just finish up by doing a little extra inking around the edges. And on this side, I'll just ink a little bit as well. The bottom edge doesn't really show while it's installed in the project, but it'll show when it comes, when you remove it. So here's our back wall finished and our removable wall finished.